Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show that takes place right here between the turns of your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in game. Brendan, what happened there? Did I lose you for a second?
Yeah, just, the interdecisional ships, the bridge, the comm system cut out. I'm already up here because in today's episode, we're headed to the bridge. You're going to join me at the bridge of the interdecisional spaceship for a look back at our journey in 2024. We're going to rank every game we covered on the show this year. So by the end of today's episode, you'll know Jake and I's definitive rating of all 15 games we reviewed in some capacity on the show in 2024.
Yeah, this is a fun episode every year. I love when we get to do this. And I think it's a great episode, especially for the people who care about ratings, because what we do is we put all the games we've reviewed this year, either in deep dive or talked about significantly in one way or another on the podcast, into a pub meeple ranking. So this list, in effect, forces us to separate all the 7s, all the 8s, all the 7.5s, and give you a objective list of how the games we played this year stack up against each other according to Brendan and I's consensus ranking.
Yeah. And Jake, we've done this episode every single year we've done the show. And there's some interesting things I think about this year's episode. Historically, we've had a designer who we've covered more than other designers on the show. I think in our first year of the show, we covered a lot of Stefan Feld games. In another year, we'd covered a lot of Knizia games. I think in another year, we covered a lot of Knizia games. And then this year, we didn't cover anyone more than once, which is really cool. I think this is our first. So this is our first every year of not double dipping on it. Nope, that's not true. I take it back. They're one and only Michael Kiesling, Azul Suburban Pavillion, and Tikal. So
Bang.
It's Michael Kiesling's here.
That's crazy. Hey, how about that? Yeah, I feel like it was Kramer last year. And now it's Kiesling. Yeah, the other interesting thing about this list is just that it's every time we do this list, do this episode, the list of games we've deep dive reviewed tends to get shorter. So this year it's just 15 games?
15 games.
Yeah, so that's the shortest ever. And we've seen some comments about this online. People talk about this. People are just always talking about us online all the time, 24/7. No, but seriously, we know a lot of people listening to this podcast really enjoy the deep dive episodes and are sad to see the episodes taking more and more of a backseat to other episodes. So just to explain why that's happening, it's this. Brendan and I both love making these episodes. We love doing the deep dives. It is still one of my absolute favorite things about this show, like getting in, exploring a decision space. I think that's something that really separates Decision Space from a lot of other awesome board game podcasts that are out there, just in the way that we kind of unpack Decision Space and think about games in those deep dive episodes. However, when we started this show, between the two of us, we just had so many games ready to go because either Brendan or myself or both of us had already played it enough that we could just hop on to an episode and dive deep and explore it. At this point, 4 years into Decision Space, we've used up all those arrows. So every time we sit down to do a deep dive episode, it just takes so much longer. It takes a little bit of time for us to decide what what game is worth deep diving. It takes time to get that played sufficiently to cover it. And, when we do this, we always play these games 10, 12, sometimes many more times than that. Really just whatever it takes to feel like we can do a due diligence on that. Then it takes time to come up with the notes and finally get it into our schedule to record this show. So all those things take time. And every time we're doing a deep dive from this point on, we're really starting from zero, more or less. So that's why it's not because we don't like doing them. Thank you so much for enjoying them, appreciating them when they get into your feed. But this is probably, I would guess, I don't think we're going to keep going down from that because I feel like this is the first full year that's really been like that. So I think hovering around 15 deep dives a year, sitting here right now, that feels kind of right. What do you think about that?
I think you're right, Jake. And I just looked it up. In 2022, we reviewed 27 games. In 2023, we reviewed 19 games. And this year we did 15. And I think 15 is a good number to shoot for. not in, especially in terms of just the logistics of what you dove into. And then I think also having an interesting blend where we feel like we have meaningful things to say about the games we're covering. When we were covering 27 deep dive games a year or more, I think we did even more the first year we did the podcast because we were on this bonkers 2-to-1
doing like
cadence.
2-to-1. Yeah.
Yeah, which is just, what were we doing? Like, save it, y'all, save it. But anyway, there have definitely been times, not this year, but in previous years where I felt I was scraping the bottom of the barrel to have interesting things to say about the games that weren't specifically about that were about games in general, like observations about this game taken more broad. And I think that's what our deep dive episodes do really well. So this gives both our deep dives room to breathe, us to develop interesting, meaningful thoughts about those games, and then about how we understand games through a specific game, and then to noodle on that idea for a little bit longer, explore an idea, then play some more games, then come back. And that's what I love about the show, and I think what a lot of others love about the show too. So yeah, this should be our baseline. 15 seems about right.
Yeah.
No promises. Maybe next year it's going to be 12. Who could say? But we'll see. And also, Jake, we have some games. We could cover Scout. We could cover High Society.
You're right. Yeah, I'm being a little bit facetious. We definitely have games that we've played that we haven't reviewed on the podcast, but it's not the same as like.
Yeah. You played
I can't
Castles of
wait to
Burgundy
cover
200
Castles of
times.
Burgundy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We should say right now at the front of this episode, before we get any further, we always ask our community to rank these games as well so we can share our community rating. So if you have not yet done that, if you have not yet done that, please check out the link in the description of this podcast where you can contribute, do a Pub Meeple ranking, and share your thoughts on these games. We'll be sharing in the next episode our community list as we look at our list of 15 games.
Yeah.
Any other like meta observations about what we've done here? One thing that jumps out to me is this is our first time that we have a game on here that has not been released to the public. So that's interesting. So I'm just interested to see what rankers do with that game in particular, Ego. Since likely most people filling out that Pub Meeple ranker haven't played Ego. Maybe they'll just use it as a stand-in for as the re-implementation of Beowulf the Legend, or maybe just kind of rank games sort of how I do it often. It's sort of like, which of these would I rather play right now, and just based on what they think of it, or they could just not rank it. Any of those options, totally fine.
Yeah. So there's a link to where you can rank them. It's just Pub Meeple in our show notes. Both on this podcast and on BGG and in our Discord.
Do you think we should get into the ranking of games?
I do. And as we dive in, I have two observations, Jake. One, we in past years have covered lots of games that have spanned a broad range of years. I think one of the things that's drawn a lot of listeners to our show is we don't just focus on new releases. We focus on notable games throughout sort of modern board gaming's history and gone deep on them. And we've done that a little bit this year. But our oldest game that we covered this year is from 1999, Tikal. We also covered Ticket to Ride, a 2004 release. And then, interestingly, we also have some newer stuff. And there's a range of games that fall sort of between Tikal and Ego, which is unreleased, the Knizia, the game that you mentioned. And I think we've spanned the full range from 1999 to now pretty well. But interestingly, in addition to that observation, last year we covered Can't Stop. That was our oldest game, which was 1980. Interestingly, this is the first year of our history, Jake, in which we are re-ranking a game that we have ranked in a previous year. So I don't know if you remember, but we, in our rankings last year, included Tikal because we played Tikal at Geekway and we did sort of a mini review of it that we included in our broader Kramer and Kiesling designer space episode, which we should really do more designer space episodes where we talk about a specific designer, maybe next year. But we included Tikal in our rankings because we talked about it there. This year we felt that we had more to say about Tikal, so we went back and we reviewed it. So it might be interesting for longtime listeners of the show as a comparison point to see where we ranked Tikal last year versus this year. And I will disclose that when we rank Tikal. Now let's dive into it. So the way we do this, we go the lowest ranked game combined between Jake and I, and whoever ranked it higher gets to talk about what they enjoy about it. Is that right,
Awesome.
Jake? That's
Yeah,
how we
that
do
sounds
it.
great.
Okay.
Let's get it started with our number 15 game of the year, Burgle Bros.
Yeah. So Burgle Bros was my 12th ranked game, highest rate, and your 15th game. So I'm going to talk about Burgle Bros for a minute. Burgle Bros is a Tim Fowers cooperative game that we covered fairly recently on the show that I think leads through and has found success through incredible experiential theming. It sells a trope experience, a genre experience, the heist film beautifully. And in my eyes, it's a game that I've enjoyed, I've played, I've explored, and I've seen everything there is to see. Unlike Ocean's 11, which I'd be happy to rewatch again right now, I feel like I've had my fill on the Burgle Bros story. In terms of its decision space, I think the decisions are there to support a engaging experience with other people at the table, but don't often make the reach a high enough point that I find myself wanting to go back to it. It almost feels a little bit like a roguelite, but not quite enough. It almost feels a little bit like a maze game, but the guards don't feel smart enough to really challenge you. And the tension for a heist film just isn't quite there for me. So for both of us, Jake, I'm supposed to be doing the thing where I sell the game because I'm rating it higher. But out of all the games we covered this year, I would have been shocked if Burgle Bros wasn't our 15th ranked game. Not because it's a fine game. I own it. I enjoy it. It didn't quite live up to the promise all these years later for me.
Yeah. And also by virtue of the way we do our show, especially now, right? We don't just pick any game. We're not playing games that designers are shipping us unbidden. So any game that we cover at all has some merit, some reason why we've selected it for a deep dive, and Burgle Bros is no exception. And I actually think, I'd have to go back and check the tape on this, but I would imagine that Burgle Bros is definitely the best last ranked game that we've ever had on a year of decision space.
Yeah.
I think what this says to me about this list is that there were no stinkers this year.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely rate Burgle Bros higher than Zulareto and Messina and Santa Monica and Spots from last year.
A lot of people not happy about that spots
Yeah.
comment. So let's move right on to number 14. Our number 14 game of the year, Dracula versus Van Helsing. This was Brendan's number 14 and my number 13 game. So I get to talk about this one.
Yeah.
We just covered this game. It's very fresh in my mind. And ultimately, the thing that held this game back, I think, from being higher up on this list is just that very similar to Burgle Bros, actually. Maybe this is kind of the thing that's going to knock games down our list in particular, is that the decisions became kind of rote pretty quickly. I
Yep.
felt like we've seen what the game had offered, and as I played it more, I wasn't seeing more. That was the bad thing about the game, but the game itself, very pleasant. Super intuitive rules system, really fun to learn, quick to the table, and just generally and genuinely pleasant, fun, kind of featherweight game experience where you are doing this kind of 1v1 quasi trick taking lane battle game.
Yeah, a really cool example of using the sort of terms and language and I don't know, framework of a specific genre and applying that to a game that feels really different but makes more intuitive sense if you come in with that experience. And there's maybe not a better genre to do that with than trick-taking games at this point, especially given their resurgence. I think maybe a few years ago you would have had some confused stares, but there's just been so many trick-taking games and they've really cut through to sort of mainstream hobby board game appeal that it just works. And I think that template of taking the language and framework of a game, bending it and twisting it into something new and sort of saying, look, this is that, but it's not, but it's that. So you can understand what this is an interesting design trick that I would love to see more games endeavor upon. And the art in Dracula versus Van Helsing is cool. It's charming. It's good. This is my game, Jake, that I have to see if this is actually true. No, it's not true. This is my second most wanted sequel. I want a sequel for Dracula versus Helsing. It's my number 2 for that category this year.
Cool.
I think that the
Awesome.
next design
Put it
in
on
that
the
thread would
box.
just be so good. Yeah.
Decision
Right
Space
there.
number 2 most wanted sequel
Yeah, buy the game that doesn't yet exist.
We
And
should
my yeah,
create a little
okay.
icon for that, and
Yeah.
I'll share it. I'll tweet at them on our new Blue Sky account. Follow us on Blue Sky. They'll love that.
I can't. Okay, moving on to our number 13 ranked game of the year. Jake, this one is so do you let me know if I pronounce this right, okay? Loot. Is
Keep
that good?
going. Oh yeah, that's probably it. There
Loot.
you go. Loot.
Yeah. So Loot is a Charles Chevalier designed. How do you explain this game, Jake? It's a sort of
Like
tile-laying game on a
efficiency puzzle
board.
on crack.
Yeah. You have a shared play space where you're adding pieces, but then you also have a personal puzzle space. So it's almost like you took Calico and mashed it up with Babylonia.
It's like what's our term for like many competing objectives
Yeah.
overlaid objectives?
Overlaid.
It's
Yeah.
like the game. It's like an efficiency tile placement game where every tile you play is like creating a new overlaid tile placement puzzle for you
Yeah.
to try and do as well.
Yeah.
So I had this one higher than you.
Which
My
is
11th,
shocking,
you're
I
15th.
think.
Why is this shocking?
Because I really wanted to like this game.
Oh, I
I
thought you
like
said
begged you to
shocking. I
play
had it
it.
at 11.
No, shockingly, you have it higher than me,
Okay.
but I have it at 15. So
Yeah, I can't really. It's not that shocking. That's
yeah,
why I'm confused. Yeah. So you wanted to like it. I think
yeah,
I liked it more than you.
I think so too.
I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but in this one, the decision space became rote after repeated
Mm,
plays, where it kind of felt like this game is so puzzly, but it felt like the puzzle is kind of was almost solvable in a way. Like
yeah,
it kind of promises player interaction, but ultimately that there's like kind of ways around the blocking people. So that wasn't ultimately like a satisfying enough lever to take the game out of this space of kind of this like non-interactive efficiency puzzle machine. And that was really fun for me to tinker around with and play in for probably 5, 6, 7 games on Board Game Arena. And then I kind of felt like I went at the point where I felt like I got pretty decent at the puzzle. The game became a lot less fun and
yeah,
exciting for me.
yeah. Jake, this one's so interesting because the structure of the game is really cool, and in my eyes, it's playing in two genres that I really like at once. Right, the personal player board puzzle. I'm not being facetious when I say you're playing Calico on your personal player board. You have tiles that require certain other types of tiles around them, and it's a hex board, and then you're trying to double count them. You're also choosing what tiles you add, these little sort of objective tiles. So maybe you want castles and you want sheep and you want axes, and then you want to put tiles next to those that also want castles, sheep, and axes. So you're trying to get as many things to count multiple times as possible. But then to acquire those tiles, you're playing a game that is very much like Blue Lagoon or Babylonia. So it's this shared hex board where you're laying out your little meeples, your little Viking people across that map, and you have to play next to a space adjacent to where you've already played. And you sort of snake out as a group. And as Jake said, the promise of the game is that maybe you're going to block each other as you spread out. But there's so many options in terms of what's on that board, and also I think this is really important because it's a hex grid that you're playing to. It's much easier to go around someone than it would be if, say, it was a square grid where there's
Mm.
fewer. It would be easier to cut people off on a square grid like, say, Tigris and Euphrates than like Babylonia. And Knizia has sort of played with that in his tiling games, and I feel like Loot goes for the more free, more open, more flexible, and then it fills it with things you might be able to go to and gives you too many things. So you never feel that restricted.
Yeah, I wonder if there was a version of this game at one point that felt much more tight and combative.
Yeah.
Because the game also gives you one-time player powers that you can use
Mm,
to kind of get around people or move straight through them. And I think that really undermines sort of the
yeah.
integrity of that
Yeah.
interactive element of the game. It's been a while since I played this one, but I think that ultimately was like an area where we felt like the game just fell down a little bit from something that we'd want to continue to play more and more. So that's
Yeah.
Loot with 3 O's, our number 13 game of the year.
And our number 12 game of the year was Michael Kiesling's Azul Summer Pavilion, the second Azul game we've covered on the show.
It's so funny because this is our 12th best game of the year. However,
Yeah.
we both synced up on our rating for this and have it rated, both of us, at number 10.
Yeah.
how,
Love it.
how
How
does
did that
that work?
happen?
Yeah.
Because some of us, right, we have large discrepancies in
yeah,
some
right.
places where one of us has rated it really high and one of us has rated a game much lower. So that's warped the order of the list. But yeah, it is that means we have some very large deltas in the
Yeah.
future. So I guess that just says we both like this game. And that's kind of what the conclusion we came to. It was a fine sequel to Azul.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're unfamiliar, Azul Summer Pavilion is very much like base Azul, except for instead of squares, you have diamond, rhombus shaped tiles.
Diamonds for
And
sure.
no, what's a rhombus?
Isn't a rhombus the one that's like more like a trapezoid?
No,
No,
look,
you're
Google
right. You're
rhombus
right. Oh,
right
it is.
now.
You're
Yeah.
right. It is.
Hey.
It's a 2D shape that looks a lot like a diamond. Okay, thank you. You're right.
Looks very much
Dang.
like the
Let's go,
Azul
Jake.
Summer Pavilion tiles. Thank
It's a
you.
rhombus. Yep.
Anyway, yeah, so this is like the rhombus version of Azul, as everybody always says. That adds a few additional wrinkles in. You've got, instead of only being able to play to specific colored tiles, you've some wild spaces you can fill in. When you complete areas of your player board, you get to take tiles from a separate type of board, kind of like a shared board where you can take tiles from. And it ultimately creates a feeling of sort of like much more loosey-goosey Azul.
Yeah.
And I think the game is very fun to play. I think it's a good game, very pleasant. Really, I think it just suffers in comparison to Azul, where I think I found the actual kind of tactical decisions to feel a lot tighter. I felt like it had more exciting moments with like potential big penalties. That just more suited to my taste. But there's a huge swath of people out there where Azul Summer Pavilion will be suited more to their taste, and that's great as well.
Yeah. Azul Summer Pavilion, I think, and we said this on the episode, I believe, is really Azul for anyone who feels that Azul is too mean. If there was ever a table that was sort of like, oh, you stuck me with that, and then they don't want to play anymore, they should just play Azul Summer Pavilion, because it really is a lighter, more sort of comfort game offering of a similar puzzle that in my opinion, feels like it's lost its teeth, both in both metaphorical potential meanings. Both you can't bite into anyone else, and it has, in my opinion, fewer interesting decisions biting back into you. So yeah, that's why we both, I guess, ranked Azul Summer Pavilion our 10th favorite game of the year, but is our combined 12th best game of 2024 that we covered.
All right, well, let's move right along to our number 11 game of the year, falling just short of our top 10. And that is one Captain Flip. Brendan's number 4 game of the year, and my number 4. Nope, that says 14. My 14th favorite game of the year.
Can I invert the structure of this episode and just say, explain yourself? No, I cannot. Okay, let me do the thing, and then you can explain yourself. Okay, Captain Flip is a light tile laying game that was. Oh my god, Jake, I'm so sorry. Okay, Captain Flip is a light tile laying game, sort of with push your luck elements, designed by Palomori and Remo Conzadori, and released by Play Punk, which is Antoine Bauza's publishing company. This was one of their first games. So Captain Flip won the Spiel des Jahres, right? Did it win this year?
No, it didn't.
It didn't win, but it should have, because
Sky
I
Team
think
won.
Yeah, right. Sky Team. We should cover that game. Captain Flip is a delight. Players have a personal player board in which every turn they draw a tile from a bag, and there are columns and rows on their player board, and they're going to choose a column and then place whatever the tile that they drew in the lowest row of that column that doesn't have a tile already in it. There's In addition to which column you're going to place your tile into, you also have a decision of if you're going to flip the tile. So you draw it, you see what it is. There are lots of different characters shown on these tiles that all have different effects. Maybe you get to, if you play this one, you get to flip an adjacent tile that's next to it. Or maybe you get 5 points and it's the gunner. But if you have 3 gunners on your board at the end of the game, you cannot win. You just lose the game. Or there's carpenters that don't want to be in the same row or column as gunners. Or there's, you can go on and on and on, swabbies, which you want 1 in each column. And it's this very light sort of family weight tile laying, push your luck light game that I find interesting, fun, charming. And I think for me, Jake, we talked about quintessential Brendan games recently and quintessential Jake games. I think the dividing line here is I have fun trying to tame the random storm of Captain Flip, of sort of saying, okay, how can I shape the sort of random position that I found myself in to give me the best possible odds going forwards, and maybe, increase my chances by some marginal rate. And you find it insipid and like you're not getting better enough every time you play.
Yeah, I think that's right. I
Okay.
think for me, the taming the randomness is more fun in different type of game, right? It's more
Yeah.
fun if I'm not like trying to, have certain tiles in certain places, and like I think like just for what I want in games, if games are asking me to do this kind of like set collection and kind of spatial puzzle to some effect, I just didn't like the sheer amount of input randomness that kind of
Mm.
went into the puzzle and ultimately left me feeling unsatisfied, even though I played this game a ton and really wanted to like it. And in the first few plays, thought it was super cool. Love how light it is, love how quick it is to learn and fun. And then I just played it more and more and just like found myself liking it less and less. Unfortunately, though, obviously, this game has a ton of fans around the world. A Spiel nominee, and by all accounts, well deserved. Just not one for me, unfortunately.
This game is probably my most played game of the year,
Yeah,
especially out of all the games here. I've played it 570 times. I own it. Mine. I've played it a fair amount.
that's a
I've played this game
lot of
a
Captain Flip
lot.
plays.
And I
I
there's a
played
bunch of
it
different boards.
17 times ish. So, maybe take Brendan's opinion more seriously than my own on this one.
At least if you align with my taste. I will say, Jake, all the additional boards give the game a lot of replayability. And there's a board that is a promo board that got released straight to Board Game Arena that I'm trying to track down a physical version of, because it's, in my opinion, it's a really interesting board and highlights some of the sort of strategic planning that the game gestures at, but doesn't really have in some of the base boards. So it's cool to see the system being iterated on. I really like Captain Flip. I hope this game, that there's more of this game or this system of game. It seems like it's sort of ripe for a version 2. But yeah, I don't know. It's just charming. I don't know why I like this game as much as I like it. It's really it's fun. I think
Awesome.
this is one of my more fun than interesting games, and it's really fun.
And that is our number 11 game of the year, just missing out on our top 10. I do feel, knowing how much you love this game, your
Yeah,
number 4 game,
yeah.
that says a lot. And it almost makes me feel just a little bit bad that I've dragged it down so low on this list. But I've got a feeling that, coming up soon, you'll be doing the same to me.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Our number 10 game
Yeah.
on this list is Ticket to Ride.
Yeah.
My number 9 game, your number 8 game. And I think for me,
Yeah.
this is where you might pick something slightly different, but this is, if it's really fitting. Like, we're now in our top 10, and this is where I draw the line, is like, say, this game and up are like quintessential like board games that like
Mm,
people should just try. If you
mm,
like games, if you're listening to this episode,
yeah.
you haven't played any of these games, these are all ones that, in my opinion, are well worth your time. I'm stamping the Decision Space seal of approval on Ticket to Ride and Up.
Yeah, for sure. I Ticket to Ride, is a game that I think both Jake and I had played at some point in the past, maybe a handful of times, not a ton. And I really enjoyed the experience of trying to dive deep on a family weight game like Ticket to Ride, understand not only why it works, because I think playing it a couple times, you can pick that up fairly clearly. But why does it appeal as broadly as it does? What about the decisions of Ticket to Ride are engaging, interesting, challenging, exciting, meaningful, that keeps players coming back? Because clearly it does. I found Ticket to Ride gave players an incredible arc and sense of a destination, right? Those tickets that you get at the start really do allow you to string together a strategy. Playing it repeatedly allows you to get in the mind of other players at the table, especially as they present you with information by playing to the board, with seeing what they want to do, and then trying to see if there's ways in which you can disrupt them. Ticket to Ride is not a perfect game, but it's very good. And there were a lot of lessons, just design lessons that I learned playing Ticket to Ride of interesting and novel ways in which I think it levels the playing field, but also just, I don't know, presents a bang up game arc. The arc of Ticket to Ride is great. I like
It's
this one.
the arc is so interesting because that's honestly like the biggest downside of the game, in my opinion, is like
Yeah.
you spend like the first third of the game
Drawing
not
cards.
really
Yeah.
playing. Everybody's just drawing cards, and then everybody's just playing cards. And then it's like maybe I need to draw a couple of cards, right? So it has this total like slow build to a climax, and
Yeah.
then a quick falling action, and then you're out. And I think having those different like clear parts of the game
Mm-hmm.
give it like a sense of tempo and dynamics that I always really enjoy in games, and you don't always see
Yeah.
kind of that build up
A real
excel
inflection
un-
point. Yep.
yeah, like we are moving into the next phase type
Yeah.
thing,
All
and kind of
aboard,
having like
baby.
that shared agency over when that happens, what it looks like when that happens is fun and exciting. A game that definitely still worth your time, even if it is, you know, kind of the game that brought you into the hobby, playing with family, and now you feel like you're on bigger and better things. I think most like serious game groups could still have a serious and good time playing Ticket to Ride if you treat it in the same way you would I don't know, Imperial Struggle.
Yeah. Like light and breezy. Just play it quick, right? That's what you're
Wait,
saying.
no.
Wait, you're saying the opposite.
I'm saying it works in both settings. Like it,
Mm.
you know, it's great that it's like a super light
Yeah.
gateway game that can bring people into the hobby, but it actually also stands up to
Oh,
like
totally.
serious scrutiny,
Try
you know,
harding.
and yeah, try harding, I guess, but just like treating as like a, you know, a lot of, I think a lot of kind of super light entryway games, Captain Flip, for
Yeah.
example, that's not
Yeah.
going to like, you can't like bring that to you know, a hardcore gaming enthusiast board game night and be like, let's like dive deep into
Sure.
Captain Flip, right? It's
Yeah.
not going to hold up to scrutiny in the same way. And I think that Ticket to Ride is can laudably do both better than
Mm.
almost any game.
Interesting. Yeah. And tryhard was said very affectionately, as both Jake and I are clearly tryhards. Okay, so Ticket to Ride, our number 10 ranked game of 2024 of games we covered. Jake, the stage is yours. Number 9, Five Tribes, the Gins of Naquala. Do people say the subtitle in that one? I think it's
No.
just Five Tribes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Five Tribes.
Bruno Cathala.
It's so funny because Five Tribes, that's like an awesome sounding name. It sounds good. It rolls off your tongue so well, but the colon, the gins of Naquala, it's just like
Naquala.
mush in your mouth, you
Yeah.
know? Not
Yeah.
great.
Oof. Oof.
Okay,
Five Tribes. Okay.
Five Tribes. Yeah, so my number 3 game of the year and Brendan's number 13. And this is like the inverse, right? This is clearly, I'm glad we have this language now. A quintessential Jake game
Yeah.
is not a quintessential Brendan game. It's actually funny in our kind of Rank-A-Thon channel. People are filling out the pub meeples, sharing their rankings in our Discord, and people were talking about Five Tribes as a game that was well, shoot, what I gotta find now. It basically saying like too open and questionable heuristics. I think unwieldy decision space and poor heuristics. That was the thread that was started about Five Tribes, and I kind of chimed up in there as like, I think you just described quintessential Jake games.
That's awesome. I love it. You want to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what Five Tribes is a worker displacement game where you start out with a board muddled with 5 different colors of meeples on tiles, and you have to play a Moncala game with them in order to take actions, different actions on the board, which are going to be coupled with the action of the workers that you're picking up. If you like searching for the best move in a board game, if that brings you satisfaction, Five Tribes is a game that has that in spades. Fortunately, that's something I love to do and really appreciate and enjoy in games. But it's a polarizing thing. Clearly, a lot of people, that's just not their bag. Brendan's not your bag. No problem. I'm fine with that. I feel like 13, ranking at 13, that's a little bit low. But yeah, it's a polarizing game, but one that playing it again on Board Game Arena, it made me realize why like this is a game ultimately it's never going to leave my collection, even if it's one that I don't get off the shelf too much these days. It's just so satisfying. And a lot of people, the other thing is people don't like as much the first the player order auction that happens at the start of every turn where you're auctioning victory points for turn order. I love that kind of thing. And I feel like that also is something that like I've just really enjoyed the puzzle of and feel like adds even more satisfying like skill ceiling from kind of the evaluate side of things to a game that already has like a huge skill floor with the search side of things. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so a polarizing game with a lot of kind of polarizing elements that ultimately really works for me and might not work for you. But if you kind of side with me after listening to the quintessential Jake Games episode and think like, I think like this person, I like similar games, then Five Tribes is one you absolutely have to check out.
One other thing about Five Tribes that's really cool is there's not many games like Five Tribes. It's a really unique sort of game setup and play experience in terms of what it's trying, what it presents to you. Beyond that, I also love typically Bruno Cathala games. I find he hits a really interesting level of approachable rules with sort of nuanced complexity typically, but accomplishes that in really different ways. He also doesn't mind really obfuscating probabilities or making a big mess for players to sort through. And Five Tribes does that for me. And there's a lot of random setup in Five Tribes that I don't always feel like comes to pass in a way that feels all that meaningful. So the board kind of wanes down. It has this unique arc, right? Where you build the board all the way up with all the meeples, you randomly seed it at the beginning, and then you just slowly take them off as the play goes on through this Macaulay system. And all of this sort of sounds great to me, but I feel like it always kind of wanes in the exact same way. And I wanted it to be a little bit more different. And yes, you have these gins that give you different paths strategically, potentially, depending on when you get them and how strong they are. But for me, I felt like I was always kind of looking for the same things at the same time in the game in a way that just, even though I probably could have worked harder to find better solutions as I was playing, it kind of felt like I was just tired of looking for my glasses. I felt like I was always looking for my lost glasses in my house, you know? Like it didn't excite in the way that I wanted it to. And some of that is that I wasn't necessarily doing the building up in the ways that maybe you were, Jake, and I wasn't seeing the broader game in the ways that you were. But it didn't draw me in the way that I wanted it to.
Yeah, I love that analogy of sort of like blurry vision for
Yeah.
kind of like the search phase in game because
Yeah.
that's really what it feels like. I love a game where you go into it and you're like have to squint and you're just like what is happening?
Yeah.
And then ever so slowly the picture comes into focus and you narrow down moves until you find the one and now you're seeing clearly. That's so satisfying. And you know, Five Tribes that gives you that on every turn for sure.
Okay. Well, you ranked it 3, and I ranked it 13. So I feel like that's a good place to leave us. So,
Okay,
our number 8 game.
Ego. An
Yeah.
interesting one on this list because it's not out yet, and we've only been able to play it a few times.
Yeah.
It's our number 8 game. I put it at number 5. Brendan put it at number 11. I do want to say, thinking about how the Pub Meeple ranking works,
Yeah.
I tend to pick games that I click on the one that I want to play right now. You know, which of these do I want to play more?
Yeah.
And I think Ego might be getting a little bit padded by just kind of my method there, in that all these other games I've played a dozen times or more, and Ego I've played twice. So it's like I know there's more to explore there. I had a lot of fun with my plays, but maybe you know this would come down a little bit, or potentially go up more if I had played it as much as the rest of the game on this list. So I just want to put that caveat out there. Ego is a re-implementation of Beowulf the Legend, coming out by Bite Wings Games in 2025, I believe. And this is a auction game designed by Reiner Knizia, where you will be going through a series of events, and it's kind of an iterative number of auctions where you have to collect cards, and then you'll be spending the cards in the auctions to gain rewards or earn punishments if you do poorly. There'll be opportunities to kind of restock your hand. You're always thinking about the future. And then it has this like quintessential risk element where you have the opportunity many times in this game to gamble, flip cards off the top of the deck, see if you bust or see if you hit blackjack and get to add a bunch of cards to your hand that really liven this up on the table and give it a satisfying mix of kind of over the table play, funny moments where people are kind of standing up and shouting about what's happening, and then also like it's Reiner Knizia, so you kind of know there's satisfying mechanics under the hood. There's plenty to think about, long term planning to be had, and I think a pretty satisfying game that Bite Wings has done a lot to sort of like tighten up some aspects of it, and especially like game length. Like you get through this one pretty quickly.
Yeah,
That's Ego.
Ego's really cool. It's speaking of games that we covered on the show this year that sort of have a unique arc and feel, Ego is definitely among them. And I think we've just covered a lot of games that are a little bit different this year. You know, we've had years where we've covered a lot of strategy Euros. This is not as much one of these years. Ego has, you know, you're sort of laying out of what Ego is perfect, but I think if you haven't played Ego, it can be hard to imagine. So another way to maybe present the structure of the game is imagine you're going to go on an adventure and your Knizia is going to the designer just hands you a bunch of stuff to start. And then every once in a while, you're going to use some of the stuff you have and have the chance of getting some more. But if you get low on food, you can play blackjack. And if you win, you get a bunch of food that's going to help you. And if you lose, you get some weight put in your backpack. And you have to try to make it to the end, having the most food and the least weight in your backpack. And that's basically Ego. But it also has moments of spectacle that I don't know if any other games on our list, bar maybe our top ranked game, reach, where everyone at the table is just watching and excited to see what happens with the flip of a card. There's something powerful about flipping a card or rolling a dice where everyone has a simple understanding of what it means when a certain suit comes up. And the visceral reaction that can elicit. And it's there in Ego. And it's really fun when, you know, you're both playing blackjack and you hit 7 times in a row and you're just squirming knowing you have to go again and hoping you don't bust. It's just, and you know, that's a metaphor. We're abstracting a broader system, but Ego's good. I want to play Ego more. This is one, Jake, that I really hope I get played some over the holidays because it's also one I think you could play with folks who haven't played, who aren't hobby gamers per se.
Yeah, I love that that idea of the stand-up moments. Like if your game has something that causes people to like all react to in a big exciting way. They don't have to stand up, but just like even if your game has an element where every other table is just like, oh,
Yeah.
you know, that is that is communicating so much to you. Like all the players are bought in to the game, the mechanics, whatever's happening in that moment, that, you know, it's really important. Like that is a really good signpost that your game is working well. And it definitely, Ego definitely has that. Our number 8 game of the year. Let's move right along to our number 7 game of the year, Castle Combo. I put this one at number 7. Brendan had it at number 9. Another one that we just recently reviewed in our first ever double feature episode alongside Dracula versus Van Helsing. And it's a silly little game, really, at the end of the day. Super silly, super light decisions, but it just has some really genius game design in it that makes it work almost better than it deserves. Which is such a weird thing to say about games, but the fact that you have fun drafting decisions on every turn, even though the market of cards is really small and doesn't even change that much, that you have fun card placement, even though you only have a grid, a 3x3 grid where you'll be placing 9 total cards over the course of play. It's just working. It's firing on all cylinders, even though those cylinders are like kind of small. I don't know how
Yeah.
to say it more than that.
There's almost no new ideas, but also somehow it feels kind of fresh. It is this enigmatic little game. Uh, it also presents as being a multiplayer game when it is in fact, in my opinion, a two-player game. Which is just a player preference thing. This does play from 2 to 5 players, and I would play it with 2 or 3. But it is best at 2. I think when the decision space broadens to considering more easily what other players incentives are, what their goals are, what their objectives are. And when you can utilize some of the drafting, there's this cool mechanism around moving there's 2 drafting rows that each have 3 cards, and you can either switch the row that you're drafting from or pay to refresh the cards. So you have these interesting tools presented to you, especially in a 2-player game, to hate draft cards in a way that is not just, I'm going to take it. And I think that games that present novel ways to hate draft cards that aren't just, I'm going to take it myself and use it. For me, that opens up more nuanced and interesting decisions that create problems for players to solve a little bit more obliquely. They have to come at it, you can't just come at it head on. And that it feels good in a game as light as Castle Combo. This also just has the like high score chasing sort of addictive quality of being a 9-turn game. You're going to make 9 major decisions, more or less, a few more than that. But it's still, you always feel like you're 1 card away from winning, I think, in Castle Combo too. Not always, but typically, if the right card flips, you have that chance. And it's a fun little game. This was one I'm really glad I played from a design interest perspective. Just sort of, it's presented really cleanly, done really well. There's not a lot of rough edges. That's Castle Combo.
And our number 6 game of the year is Bunny Kingdom. This came in
Ori-
at number 12 for me and number 2 for Brendan.
Yeah, so this is a Richard Garfield drafting game. And it is, so you're going to be drafting cards throughout the course of a few rounds that you're playing. And the cards represent a few different things. One, they could represent a space on a shared board that shows a grid. They could represent resources that you could add to those spaces. They could represent cities that are going to act as a multiplier for points in these sort of areas that you're trying to build as the game goes on, of contiguous spaces on that board called fiefs. They could also be game end victory scoring objectives. Have 7 fish and you get 20 points. For every carrot you get a point. Things like that. Or they could be treasure cards that give you flat points now, and then have some other game end scoring objective cards that you could bolt on that kind of make them a viable strategic path. So maybe this is the game, if you get the treasure hunter objective, that you really care about treasure and you're thinking, okay, I'm not going to play on the board as much. I'm going to play this sort of drafting treasure game, pick my spots, build smaller fiefs. I think Bunny Kingdom for me is interesting, novel, engaging, and always offers varied decisions in a way that I feel myself struggling to understand to read the shape of a given game, because the cards are just sort of, let's just shuffle off all the cards, make some decks, and then that's what we're going to draw from, more or less. And I find that a really fun puzzle to try to solve on repeated plays, right? To say, okay, what are the cards that came out in this first round, and what does that mean for the rest of the game? That's for me a really fun thing to do, and something that's not easy for games to create. And Bunny Kingdom does it masterfully. The shared objectives, these sort of overlaid goals of, you're trying to build these fiefs on the board, but you also need these parchments that are going to be your end game scoring conditions. And you also need cities in those fiefs that you're trying to sort of build out. And also you need resources to add to them, because you multiply the resources in them by the number of cities. And then also maybe what you actually want, because most of what you're doing is speculating as you're drafting all these cards, is just some certainty of some points that you know are going to hit the table by taking some of the treasures. And that's not an easy problem to solve, at least for me. I love sort of area control games, and this is it's a really different twist on an area control game where you're literally trying to control areas on a board. But there is a sense of blocking at times. Maybe you hate draft an area, take a card from someone else just because it's going to meaningfully deny them 30 points or something, where I feel forced to think about what other players are doing, but not always factor it in. It's that sweet spot for me where I get to, hit the hate draft button a couple times, but it's not what I'm planning my game around. And yeah, I love Bunny Kingdom. I think it's a triumph. It's a really interesting, strong design. And Jake clearly disagrees.
Yeah, no, the thing is, I don't really disagree that much. Like I
Yeah,
said at the beginning, I think all the games on this list are pretty good games, and you can barely shine a light between my number 13 ranked game
sure.
Loot and my number fifth ranked game Ego on this list.
Yeah,
So this that happened to be 12. If I did the Pub Meeple again right now, maybe it ends up like 6 or 8. I think it's
sure.
a fun game. I think Richard Garfield's a great designer. Some elements of just how the game works, it was just not very intuitive for me.
Mm,
It was hard for me to kind of like grok how all the five sin kingdoms and resource collection worked in kind of an annoying way. That's
mm.
probably on me, but maybe that speaks to the design being just not communicated quite as neatly as it could be or something. So I found some elements of it kind of annoying, but agree it's a fun game, well worth checking out for sure. And well deserved sixth place game of the year, Bunny Kingdom.
Okay, and our number 5 game of the year is a game released in 2024. I wonder if this might be the first time this has ever happened, that we have a game released in the year we covered, the year we're discussing, ranked in our top 5 in our rankings for the year. But it's Nimalia. Nimalia is this really light, puzzly tile laying game in which the tiles are these sort of cards that show them, that are themselves made up of sort of terrain and then animals within them. So you might have water and grass and snow, and then you might have penguins and polar bears and pandas and alligators. And then there are objectives that are laid out at the start of the game that you're going to, throughout these different rounds. So maybe in the first round, you're going to do objective A and objective B. Then you're going to do objective A and objective C, then objective A and objective D. Then you're going to do B and C, and you sort of go through them throughout the game. And that's not perfectly it, but it's this sort of ebb and flow of the same objective. So you have a sense of planning what you're going to do as the game goes on, as you collect these cards and lay out these arrangements of terrain and animals in this sort of grid. But the twist in Amalia is that you can play those cards to cover up past cards, but you might not want to, because you might want to expand, because a lot of these objectives want you to have lots of stuff. But sometimes it just makes sense to cover up past things that might be negative points based on the objective. Or maybe because of how things are going, with how the objectives are laid out and the cards that you drafted, you put down a tile that you knew you were going to cover up in a future round, and you've saved a spot and you covered up with the perfect tile. I think Namalia just has this really nice sort of, it's a personal puzzle game where you're really comparing scores a little bit, maybe taking something that other people want, but not a ton. And just has a really nice decision space that lets you broadly plan, and then has a clean puzzle with some nice depth in terms of that stacking.
Yeah. Namali doesn't really excite me that much. Like I'm not
Sure.
super jazzed up to play this game, but it's very pleasant and it's the kind of game that's fun to show people too
Yeah.
cuz just like check this out. It's such a simple little thing. The I think I saw it first in Isle of Skye. I'm not sure if that's
Mm,
where this kind of objective system originated or if it was used elsewhere before, where you can kind of see like in the first round we're scoring this and the second round you'll be scoring these two and so on and so forth, and
yeah.
you get to a point in the game where it's like, okay, we're not scoring that anymore, so I can just like forget
You can
about that.
ignore it. Yeah.
I love that. I think
Yeah.
we need to see that in more places. You have to be careful with it, right? Because overlaid objectives like that, it could become too much. But Namalia just feels like the perfect vehicle for that mechanism to be like the hero mechanism and really shine. And it does not fumble the football. It holds up to that and absolutely delivers an awesome little card game. That's our number 5 game of the year, Namalia.
Namalia. Cool. So our number 4 game of the year is one Jake had ranked 4 and I had ranked 7. And this is the puzzle laying polyomino-ish game, Planet Unknown. Jake, what's great about Planet Unknown?
There's a lot to like about Planet Unknown. It is a tile drafting game where you're building out your personal player board. And we've seen this type of game before. where you're drafting tiles from a shared board, filling in a personal player space. But there are some really clever design decisions in Planet Unknown that I think elevates this simple form into kind of like one of the best iterations of that out there. The lazy Susan that the game uses to draft tiles so that you can tilt it what's facing you, you get to take, and that decision also directly influences all the other players by giving them something that they have to take from, is both really fun to play with and use, and also like adds some great decision space to the game. So you love that. I love the fact that every tile you place is advancing you up tracks. You've got five different, it might be six different colored tracks in the game associated with the different tiles. So I like how cleanly those tracks are tied to the tile. There's nothing more to it than that. It's just one to one. You put the color on your board, you get to go up that track, and you're placing so many tiles and going up to the track so much, hitting bonuses on the tracks along the way, that it really cleverly, I think, gives players an undeserved sense of progress, but it still fires like those endorphins for you. Like going up tracks is just fun. When you're playing this game, you can't help but feel like you're making progress, and you're making progress in a bunch of different ways, both on your board, scoring points there, but also on the tracks, and then also in other kind of like objectives you might be competing with the players on your right and left for. So the game is really solid. And the last thing I'll say about it, the thing that like elevates even further, is there's just so much variety in the box.
Yeah.
That's the base game, and then there's a ton of different boards, ton of different corporations that are the tracks you go up. Wildly unbalanced, I think, but also wildly entertaining, and it's just fun how much the designers have seemingly pursued each impulse they've had, like kind of pulled on every possible thread in this design space and carried it to like its furthest possible extent, and then stuck it all in the box. That's not something that I would always necessarily like or advocate for. So credit to the designers for putting it together in a way that's like just such an incredibly compelling package. It's one of my favorite games to play on Board Game Arena with friends. And you know, one of the few games that after going the deep dive podcast, it's just like kind of entered my regular rotation of games to play and hasn't really left.
The box, Jake, and you highlighting the fact that the amount of content in this box is just wild, is worth mentioning again, I think. So I'm going to do it because the player boards, the different planets that you can play, and the corporations meaningfully shape the decision space in a way that doesn't feel. Sometimes when designers just throw everything in the kitchen sink, just all the ideas seemingly that they have, you can end up with a product that feels like it lacks focus, right? It just feels like, oh yeah, that's a direction you could have gone in. That's a direction you could have gone in. But like, pick the best one for me. And that sort of curated experience is oftentimes what we want as players, because games could be many different things. And we feel it's often the designer's job to tell us what the best version of this thing is. And I think that the triumph for me of Planet Unknown is that I never found myself feeling like I had wasted my time playing a given corporation or a given planet at least once. I felt like there was something interesting there and something that I would learn about the game overall that kept me wanting to come back and wanting to keep experiencing what it had to offer. And yeah, it's not necessarily a fair game, but you don't always need a fair game, especially when it's a game you're looking to show people. There's a bit of a spectacle to the whole presentation with the sort of rotating draft, like you mentioned, Jake. And I think that in some ways it leans into that because you can give sort of newer players boards that you are more basic or that you know are easier to wrangle, and yourself something more challenging, maybe that you think you're going to have a really tough time with. And I like that approach for a casual game like Planet Unknown. This is a really good one. If we were going to do an episode that was our list of our top 5 polyomino games of all time, I would wager this makes the cut, probably for both of us and certainly for one of us. So that's our number 4 game of 2024, Planet Unknown.
Great. And moving along to our bronze medal for the year, the third place game, and it is a surprise, I think, to me, especially. Quantum comes in at number 3, my number 6 game of the year, and Brendan's number 3.
Yeah.
Brendan, take it away.
So Quantum is a dice combat sort of 4X light game designed by Eric Zimmerman, in which dice are your spaceships and they are linked to the values that are shown. So ones are your thematically linked, I should say. Ones are your space stations. They're slow but powerful. They can only move one space per turn, but they're incredibly strong in combat because in combat you want to roll low numbers. On the complete opposite end, sixes, because this game is all of your ships are represented by dice, are your scouts. They can move hyper quick. They can move 6 spaces in a single turn, but they're really weak in combat. They're very rarely going to win any sort of combat. And your goal in this game is to set out with, you start with 3 ships, 3 dice on the board. It's usually a grid showing these planets, and you need to get into sort of orthogonally adjacent locations where you have dice of a value that matches the value of a given planet. So say a planet shows that it has 7, you need to get dice of yours adding up to 7. So maybe it's a 5 and a 2 or a 1 and a 6 around that planet. And then you can put one of your cubes that shows, I don't know, dominance, control, whatever. I can't even, they're quantum cubes onto that planet. And if you can shed all of your quantum cubes onto the planet, first, then you win the game. So it's a race to shedding all your cubes. Layered over all of this is the ability to attack other players, to claim enhancements, to claim single-use cards that are going to give you some benefit. The enhancements that you are taking are going to meaningfully change the way you play the game. Maybe you're better at rolling dice than everyone else. You always win ties, or maybe you can re-roll, or maybe your ships move faster. It's this whole sort of wide span of different things that, in my experience, by the end of a play of Quantum, you feel like you have this little identity of a civilization that you've sort of crafted from these single word named cards like ferocious that just piece together a sense of who you are. Quantum also comes with a box of lots of different tiles that you can arrange in lots of different ways to make your game board that I found the more I experimented in that space, the more I felt the game had lost its way. I wanted to play Quantum in a symmetric space with at 2 people, or really I want to play with 3 or 4 people and just have at it. It's a fun little sort of high randomness, high skill game that I think is due for a sequel. So where I said, Jake, that, what did I say? Dracula versus Van Helsing was my silver medal for a sequel. I really want Quantum to have a new version that iterates on the ideas here. And Quantum for me is a great game. And I think the next game would be this thematic masterpiece. And I want it. Quantum needs to be reprinted and remade.
Heck yeah, dude. Maybe they'll do an Ant-Man versus Wasp version.
Oh my gosh. Eric Zimmerman, if you hear this, I'm sorry.
Anyway, this is like, for me, I guess the distance makes your heart grow fonder award.
Yeah.
I don't think I rated this highly when we played it, but when I was doing the Pub Meeple, it's a game I realized I want to play again. Like okay. I have a certain fondness of playing the game that maybe at the time I was being like really critical, wearing my like reviewer hat. But when I was doing a Pub Meeple, I wasn't in the space of like, I need to give this game an objective rating. I was more in a different headspace of just kind of like, which of these sounds fun to play? Yeah. And Quantum kept sounding fun to play.
Yeah.
And so that's why, I think this is, ended up 6 on my list is definitely like the biggest surprise for my own personal list. I think I gave it a 6.5 or something on the podcast. So relatively low score. But I think it's just like a credit to kind of like those super clean and evocative mechanics, especially the way the dice work, the way it controls the movement and the combat. That rocks. And I just want to like play in that space. I want to play with those components and that mechanism a bit more. So yeah, I'd be down for Quantum 2. But cool. I'd also be down just for Quantum 1 again.
Yeah, let's play it. Okay, so moving on, our number 2 ranked game of 2024 is Tikal, a game Jake ranked 1 and I ranked 5. Jake, what's so good about Tikal? Why is it a game so good we ranked it again?
Yeah, so Tikal is a old school area control game. The first time we played it, it's like, this game was designed in a different time.
Yeah.
Just everything about it. It just screams, this would never be made today.
Yeah.
And we have to bring up the fact that you have 10 action points to spend on your turn in a menu of like 8 different things that you could do with those action points costing different things. That is not something you see today. And it was created in a time that people owned fewer board games. There were fewer board games on the market, period. So people would play their games that they own more. And in that kind of environment, like having a game that you could really just enjoy spending a lot of time with, right? A lot of time taking your turns, staring at the board where their opponents take their turn. It made more sense than it does now. And it's been fun to kind of return to this relic of the past in 2024. Playing this, I picked up a copy. I've played it a couple times in person, but I'm playing it primarily on Board Game Arena, where it kind of enables an environment where you can play like that again. I can open up a game of Tikal playing asynchronously and enjoy spending 3 or 4 minutes looking at a board before choosing what I want to do for my turn. Behavior I would not engage in at a game night in 2024, but in that setting, it works perfectly well. And in some ways, kind of creates this environment again, I think, for this kind of game to shine.
Yeah.
We laughed at the fact that the rules include an auction mechanism where, like, if it isn't enough for you to have 10 action points, you could also, auction off victory points to choose what order you want to go for each, based on the tiles available over the next 3 turns. Like, who would ever want to do that? Who would ever need that? Brandon, it turns out I am that person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Love it.
I've like played this game so much this year. It's definitely been like my game of the year personally. It's cemented itself in the top 10 games of all time, and I'm like now ready for that. I'm like, hell yeah, I just got to find my T-call people and like
Love
let's
it.
get down on some auction.
I think Tikal is really an incredible design for a lot of reasons. One, the whole presentation, right? What you just said, 10 action points, that menu of 7 different actions you could take, all of this, it screams complexity. It screams a wide search and a really branching decision tree. And it does have those things. But ultimately, once you've played it a couple times, maybe even by the end of your first play, a sense of, okay, of what your signposts are, what you're trying to accomplish, sort of turn to turn, sort of period in the game versus period in the game, and these different moments becomes into focus and is fairly clear. Tikal has this natural arc as you're drawing these tiles. So the players are going to build the board themselves as the play goes on, and you fill up most of this board that's laid out. But it has these stacks that are set by this is the first stack that you go through, and those tiles are all shuffled, and the second stack, and those are all shuffled. That gives this game this controlled arc that always kind of moves in the right direction, is fair, mostly fair, but feels meaningfully different every time. And because the players are building the board shape and the board positions that you can find yourself in can be wildly different. Tikal is not a game. I don't think it's my favorite. It's not my favorite Mass Trilogy game. This is the first in a series of games by Kramer and Kiesling that explore this action point system. And in my eyes, they iterate on it and improve upon it. But Tikal is really good and charmingly simple in some ways, the game that's underneath these complex systems. And it has left me wanting more. So it's easy for me, Jake, to see, having both of us sort of thought about it, digested it. We both own it now. We've both played it more, why it's our number 2 game of the year. I
Yeah.
said as a callback that we talk about how we rated it last year. So you finish your point, and then I'm going to do that.
Okay, I just want to say, for me, it is the best Mask Trilogy game after playing all of them, and I think it is by like a pretty significant margin. And I really love Torres, but it's like cemented itself into like a top 10 game for me.
And you've played Cuzco.
I played Cusco, but only once, so
Okay.
I need to play that more. But my point is going to be this: like, people, we of course we can disagree on like which of these games
They're all so
is
good. Yeah.
the best for each individual person, but I think that they are kind of diminished in our hobby's hive mind understanding of like great games because there are all these different ones and different
Yeah.
people pick different ones. If there was
Yeah.
only Tikal, I
Yeah.
think we would be thinking about this game more like El Grande. Like, there's only
Yeah.
El Grande today. But some people like Mexica, some people like Torres, some people like
Yeah.
Cusco. It kind of like, I think, diminishes all of them. But holy cow, people have to play this game. And I think it's a crime that our listeners did not rank this in the top 10 games of the 90s on our list. I was like, I think people just, it's now on Board Game Arena. It's very accessible. That is my appeal to you. Check this game out. I think it's an all-time great.
Yeah, and that's clear from our rankings, and it's definitely a game that gets better the more you play it, the more you think about it, the more you sit with it. Last year, Jake, in 2023, when we rated it, we ranked it at 13 out of 19. You had it at 12, and I had it at 11. So that really shows the arc, Jake, in your opinion on Tikal as you've played it and sat with it and spent time with it.
No, but like I was saying, unconscionable of our listeners not to rank it in the top 10.
You, in fact, let's see. Let's go through this real quick. Colorado more. Can't Stop Torres more. Trois.
Okay, it's grown on me, but
Yeah.
there's some. We covered some bangers last year.
We did.
That's
a good list.
Those are all all awesome games. Okay, should we get to our number one game of the year? And it could, when we decided to cover this, it was inevitable. It couldn't have been anything but this, I think, and it is The Resistance. I put this as my number two, and Brendan put it as his number one. So our consensus number one by a wide margin.
Yeah, The Resistance is just a genre-defining game in my eyes, and in some ways, that's not totally fair because it sort of takes a folk game, Mafia, and makes it a sort of refined board game experience that you could buy at the store. But the ways in which Don Eskridge, the game's designer, simplifies that experience, and in The Resistance presents that game, that social problem of what are the teams at the table, and cleans it up to make it approachable, streamlined, and really about that one question. Gives the players light enough tools, meaningful enough tools, with a light enough puzzle that you can play a game of deducing based on how people vote, where people might be on the spectrum, but then through that deduction puzzle, that there's enough noise through deceiving your friends, emotionally manipulating your friends, lying to your friends, all of those interesting things that the sort of magic circle of The Resistance, the theater of playing games, the stage of The Resistance presents a game experience that for me, this is a top 10 game for me, Jake. This is a top 5 game for me. The Resistance is one of the most fun, interesting games I've ever played. And listeners who are shouting, but Avalon, why don't you all like Avalon? Go listen to our episode on The Resistance and let us sell you on why The Resistance is so awesome.
Avalon is awesome. The Resistance is awesome. I feel like we don't not like Avalon. We're just saying like The Resistance on its own world-class gaming experience. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else there is to say about The Resistance besides that it is just an incredibly fun game.
Yeah.
You should play it. It is a blast. Some of my all-time favorite gaming memories are of The Resistance. I don't think I would be doing this podcast right now if not for The Resistance. It was like one of my first early game nights where I'm like, is this something I want to like invest time into, like getting people around a table to play games and then just playing Resistance for like 2.5 hours and everybody having the best time ever? Like, you know, maybe I don't have that night. Maybe this podcast never happens. Like, so it's fun, a very fun game of its own right. But it's also a game, to get on my soapbox, that like teaches you a lot about life. You know, we talk about the magic circle, how that operates, the social contract we're working in. No game, I think, puts that on like greater display than the base Resistance. And maybe that's part of the reason why I slightly prefer it to Avalon, because it just gets out of your way even more. It's like, we're just people having a witch hunt, and this is how people act, and this is how it feels when people are accusing you of lying when you're not lying. And like, this is how hard it is to like to diffuse like rumors once they've got started about you. Like, you can have so many experiences, important, I think, lessons about human behavior can be had playing this game. But it's not just a learning tool. It's also just like super freaking fun to play.
Yeah. Speaking of stand-up moments, earlier in the show, The Resistance has them in spades. It has massive sort of ludonarrative equity. It gives you the ability to tell stories in the future. Jake, how many games in your collection do you have? And I know you do, and I do, multiple plays of that you remember vividly. The Resistance might be one of my only. I mean, I have a few. There's definitely games there, but I could tell you the details of at least 4, 5 memorable Resistance games that went incredibly well or incredibly, poorly in terms of were emotionally dramatic, fraught, and wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah.
Cool. That's why it's our number 1 game of the year in 2024, The Resistance. Woo, Jake.
We did
That
it.
was good. We did it. Okay, the future of decision space. So the next game we're going to cover on the show for all of our pre-planners is Mexica.
Hey, we just kind of mentioned that briefly.
We did. Yeah, we're chipping away at the Mass Trilogy over time. It's on BGA. It's in beta now, so it's more widely available for play. It's a really interesting take on this action point system, spatial puzzle series. Different, fun.
And there is time for you to get it played because we likely won't be releasing that episode until early 2025.
Yep. We're going to take a break for a couple weeks at the end of December, something that we've always done. I mentioned this earlier in the show. We're going to do it again here, maybe a little bit longer this year just to accommodate Jake and his wife, Bridget, welcoming a new baby into the world. Congratulations again, Jake. And yeah, we hope you'll join us. We'll have another episode at the start of next year where we reveal the community's rankings. So as a reminder, tell us what you think of these 15 games. And you can do that at the link provided in our show notes. We'll also in that episode talk about sort of the show from here, what we feel we've accomplished so far, what we want to continue to accomplish with the show, and sort of the outlook for 2025 and Decision Space.
Awesome. Can't wait. Looking forward to it. And thank you so much for listening to Decision Space this year. It's been a great year for the show, a great year personally for Brendan and I, and making this show has, of course, been a memorable part of it.
Yeah. Leave us a review if you enjoy Decision Space. If you made it this far, you're definitely in the top percentile of people who enjoy our show. Yeah.
Yes,
give us something to read out on the show in 2025.
In the Subaru.
Yeah. Yes, actually you right now. But yeah, thank you to Hembry for our intro and outro song, Reach Out. If you love Decision Space, you can find more things, Decision Space, on decisionspacepodcast.com. I think we should leave it for there and say bye, y'all, and Happy New Year.
See you in 2025.